Everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I am Matt Connarton, and of course to my right is John Hopwood. If you've been watching live, of course, we just wrapped up Ward 13 with John Hopwood, and we're continuing the conversation here on Unleashed, and also Ambassador George Bruno is with us. He was also on Ward 13 with us. And if you're not watching live, as I know a lot of people watch later on YouTube, when we put these up on YouTube, of course, you can, we'll get Ward 13 up there as well, so you can see the first part of our conversation today as we're continuing on. And so, John, thank you for sticking around.
Oh, thank you.
And Ambassador, thanks for sticking around. We talked once before. I don't know if there's an archive of that online when I filled in on the progress report for Bob Backus, and we talked about immigration, and that was the day of the big coup, the Sean Jasper coup, as I like to call it, in the in the New Hampshire State Legislature, and Bob couldn't get here in time, but immigration certainly a hot topic in the presidential campaign. Does it gall you guys every time you hear Donald Trump say, you know, because he keeps taking credit for introducing the issue into the dialogue? And it's just so strange to me. He keeps saying, no one was talking about immigration until I brought it up. And it's like, really? It seems like since I was a kid, immigration was a big issue.
It's not an issue in the Democratic side.
But Republicans are obsessed with it.
Romney didn't. And I remember John Huntsman, they didn't talk about it.
Well, Romney talked about self-deporting.
Yeah, that's where that term came from. Yeah, yes. He was the first one ever to say that.
Right.
And he was pilloried for it. But
yeah.
But a lot of, like we were talking about before, a lot of undocumented immigrants have gone home. You pointed out that the numbers actually gone down.
That's right. So we have reverse immigration occurring now between the United States and Mexico.
Yeah.
And 10 years ago, it was estimated there were 13 million undocumenteds living in the United States, and now the estimate is down around 11 million. And in New Hampshire, we have, according to some rather old numbers of some years ago, maybe as many as 30,000 persons undocumented living in New Hampshire. And these are your coworkers, your schoolmates, your neighbors, your friends, people that visit your stores, everyday people living in New Hampshire who have been here for many, many years, perhaps.
When you talk about the reverse immigration, is that because of the crash, the financial crash in 2008 that sent a lot of people home? Because
that's a number of factors.
Yeah.
It has to do with the economy. Things have gotten better in Mexico and stayed about the same in the United States, or marginal improvements. So people feel that that they can go back to Mexico, and also it has to do with the uptick in law enforcement. President Obama being the president that has deported more immigrants in all of history, just about.
Yeah.
400,000 almost each year.
Activists call him the deporter-in-chief.
The deporter-in-chief, known for his tough immigration deportation stance, thinking that it would bring the Republicans to the table to negotiate immigration reform.
Right.
And it didn't happen.
Well, it seems like they ignore it, and I had mentioned this too on John's show. It seems like that's something, if you're a Republican and you get all of your information from conservative talk radio and Fox News or whatnot, you know, most Republicans, I think, don't have any idea the level of deportations under the Obama administration, because they don't talk about that. And I think they don't talk about it because it's like there's certain things that Obama does. It's like the drone strikes being another example. He's like Bush on steroids with the drone strikes. But these are things that would appeal to Republicans, so they just don't talk about it. I honestly believe that your typical Republican has no clue how many people, as you said, more than any administration in history, how many people Obama's deported.
And the misconception is that these undocumented persons coming into the United States are mostly Mexicans. They're not. In fact, 45% of undocumented persons in the United States are people who have gotten a visa, come in legally, and have overstayed their visa.
Yeah.
Well, you were the ambassador to Belize in the first Clinton administration, 1993 to 1997. When I was living in California in the 90s, there were a great many Guatemalans that had come to, and El Salvador, from El Salvador too.
Well,
And
in our law practice, we see a lot of Central Americans
Right.
from the Manchester area. Guatemalan, Honduras, Mexico, of course,
That would be-
Nicaragua.
Yeah.
that would be another show entirely because of what had happened in the 80s. That's when I was in the military. And a lot of the immigrants, and there was, I know, we don't really want to talk about that. I was in California in the 90s, did come because of political unrest that seemed to flourish during the Reagan and Bush years.
Well,
But
you
like I
mentioned
said, that's
Nicaragua,
another.
yeah.
That is
Yeah.
another. That would be another show entirely. It's not
Yeah.
like. And the other thing is, John Kenneth Galbraith. Now I come from a General Motors family. My stepmother's was executive for GM, and this is before 9/11. The border of Canada is so fluid. As long as you don't you said USA instead of America, you're not going to have any trouble. And 3 of my grandparents came from Quebec, and only one was a French Canadian, but they just came over the border. But John Kenneth Galbraith said, who was a Canadian, said, if the wage differential in Ontario and Michigan is like 25 cents an hour, the Ontarian goes over to Michigan.
Yeah.
And it's just things about economic opportunity. But in Michigan, we never think of those. When I would visit, you never think of those things. But people from Mexico are not, number one, they're seeking opportunity, just like our grandparents, great-grandparents.
They've
My
got
family
families to feed.
goes back to 1630, but they,
And they're
they were
trying to escape
refugees.
drug cartels.
And, and then the other thing, there were people in California that wanted that labor, too. There's a famous saying in
They're
California, a day without a Mexican. You know?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a movie.
Yeah,
yeah.
jobs that people didn't want. You
Yeah.
know,
And that's
yeah,
real.
a lot of
right?
American
Represent
citizens are
law.
not keen on picking tomatoes or picking grapes.
Right.
Right,
the
yeah.
Imperial Valley,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the
And
Bracero.
you talk about our border. Not long ago, I took a drive up to the northern border with Canada, and there is a really stark contrast between the reception that a person gets when you're crossing the U.S.-Canadian border, at least by car, up in
Sure.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Pittsburgh. On the U.S. side, they've recently built this multi-million-dollar border building,
Yeah.
and it's all black. It looks like a pillbox bunker. It's self-contained. It's got a cafeteria, beds, jail, a data room, a satellite room, barbed wire for as far as the eye can see,
No kidding.
zigzag
Jeez.
road for an approaching vehicle
Yeah.
to the border. And I mean, it almost looks like a war zone. Then you go to the Canadian side,
Yeah.
and they have a little brick house, and somebody standing outside. Welcome to Canada.
Right.
I mean, the contrast.
Yeah.
is so stark, and this is
what I was told?
This is the post 9/11 world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, and this is happening with our embassies as well. You go overseas, and you try. I recently went to one of our embassies. You go through 4 checkpoints to get into a U.S. embassy.
Yeah.
There's a wall around the embassy. There are no windows on the ground floors of our embassies anymore. Not that you could see them, because there's
Sure.
a wall around the embassy. You couldn't see the ground floor windows.
Yeah.
And we're turning our embassies into bunkers. where the whole purpose of an embassy is for our diplomats to be in residence and to.
You'd always see people coming into the lobby of an embassy.
Well,
but our diplomats are supposed to be out among the community, learning about what's going on in the business community, what's going on in the social world and civic world.
But you know what someone would say?
That's less and less these days.
You know what someone would say to that? Well, what about Benghazi? Then you've got.
What about Benghazi? Benghazi was a CIA safe house. It wasn't an embassy.
There you go.
Well, the narrative
wasn't
in the
even
media,
a consulate.
It's a CIA
It wasn't a diplomatic
So it wasn't-
venue.
When I heard Benghazi, I was in the intelligence community. I say to a friend immediately, the first thing, there's another CIA cock-up. Except you have to call it the other agency, or we call it the company. There's another company cock-up.
Well,
yeah.
Well, you hear things. I'm long gone from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in the primary, I have it over there. You put your NSA Rosette in, and you find that, well, this guy was formerly in the company and everything and stuff. But you hear people's stories.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody in the intelligence community say the stuff about Benghazi that,
Right.
it had nothing to do with like Hillary Clinton.
Well, Hillary Clinton, if you listen to the Republicans, was totally responsible for the death of the U.S. ambassador in Libya and the 3 or 4 contractors
I would
with her.
I've heard stuff,
That
and I wouldn't even
was with
talk
the
about
ambassador.
Yeah.
But
there's different realities socially defined. I learned that from reading Hannah Arendt, The Human Condition, and
Well, it's also twisted for partisan purposes at every turn.
it is
Well,
something like that.
Yeah.
the thing is,
Just like immigration.
Yeah.
on the Republican
Yes.
side.
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State at the time.
And the good one.
But the Secretary of State does not follow the footsteps of every U.S. ambassador around the world. I mean, there's 170, 180 U.S. ambassadors around the world. U.S. ambassadors don't ask permission to travel in the country to which they are assigned.
Yeah.
That's so true.
And so if a person is the U.S. ambassador, they presumably are the expert on conditions on the ground in their country. They're surrounded by other experts, political officers, economic officers, DEA, other enforcement personnel, and so presumably have the best and the latest information on security conditions.
Exactly.
And so when an ambassador decides to go from the capital to a border town like Benghazi, nobody at the State Department questions it because that person is the expert.
And he should kind of know what
And
he's
you're
doing.
not just
And he knows what he's getting into.
Yeah.
And if he decides, well, I'm only going to take 2 or 3 or 4 or a small number of security people with me, that's a local decision.
Yeah.
That's not a decision made by somebody at the State Department.
It's the hotline.
So, and then finally,
In trouble.
the Secretary of State really doesn't have troops. So when an ambassador is in trouble, State Department calls up Defense Department and says, Delta Force, please. I mean, that's what I was trained for when I was the U.S. ambassador.
You're not just you weren't the U.S. ambassador, you're the U.S. ambassador plenipotentiary, which means you are given independence.
That's right.
And people, there's a excellent, PBS, The Last Days of Vietnam, and how much decision-making power the ambassador of South Vietnam had. And finally, Henry Kissinger just had to order him to get on a plane.
No kidding.
He had the power, even with the meddling, and Nixon was a notorious meddler.
Yeah.
He had the power to determine. And then they just finally, the president and Kissinger, you will get on the plane right now.
Yeah.
Which ended the effort to get the people out that had been assets. He wanted to get out everybody that he could was going to face retribution.
Okay.
The U.S. ambassador is the senior U.S. official in each country to which he or she is assigned.
You represent the United States.
You represent the United States. You more than that. You represent the president of the United States, and so you have that decision-making capacity. And if a cabinet member comes in or a general comes in from the Pentagon, they're not the senior people.
Okay.
No,
It's
the
the
ambassadors.
ambassadors.
in
He
charge.
outranked
Yeah.
the 4 stars.
Okay.
Well, close to it.
Yeah.
The U.S. ambassador is, I think, designated in the military world as being a 2.5-star general.
You mean, but not quite 3.
Not quite 3.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because
But
of
more
the-
than 2.
There literally is the etiquette, like a cabinet
There's a
official
protocol.
and that.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
I once went into my SCIF, secure
Yeah.
compartmentalized intelligence facility. You have this
That's right.
door. You turn around. You know, I'm short, and you're looking at 4 stars. But I wanted to get out of there. You don't want to be around 4-star generals when you're a sergeant.
So
You
do-
wanna be
are-
around colonel.
Are Canadians ever deported?
Of course. Of
Are we
course
going
they
to
are.
Ted Cruz?
But how? Yeah. What do we do about that? No, but I mean, how often
But-
does, because obviously,
It doesn't make the news.
yeah,
And-
that's right. Yeah. So I don't know
and,
if it ever even really happens.
And law enforcement personnel is kind of thin on the Canadian border.
Right. Right.
I was up there
and-
lost. They
and-
said, you can come over, we don't care, but you're not going to get back without a passport. I said,
Oh,
I'm an
yeah.
American. And they kind of, they're Canadians. They kind of like laugh.
yeah.
I had to have a passport to get back into my own country.
Wow.
I'll tell you, a New Hampshire
funny.
license in California. I was closing. We won't get into that. I bring my passport to California. Well, it doesn't do the HHS rules. So they weren't going to let me do something. So just swallow
Wow.
up the passport.
That's incredible. Yeah.
I learned that.
Yeah, well, I can
Always be
remember the
prepared.
days of
Yeah,
driving
just
back
go-
from Canada to the United States in a car,
Anything they
and the border officer would look into the car and say, "You all Americans? Yep. Come on in."
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't show anything, or the most you would show would be a driver's license.
Yeah, I've been to Canada once, and I
Yeah.
don't remember if I even had to show my license
But
leaving
those
or
days,
coming back.
those days are long gone.
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
now in a post 9/11 world.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Everything changed then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My brother could carry a pistol on a plane till 9/11.
Right.
I never knew what he did. He was in Black Ops.
Oh, no kidding.
And he's
Oh,
one of those
okay.
people that, me, I'd write novels about it. He just didn't basically care. That was his job. He was all over Africa and places.
So at the law firm, we were talking about on
Right.
Ward 13 what you do. Can you kind of tell us again? And I want to. What do you do the most of in terms of like what do you have to help?
You're an
people the most
immigration
with?
lawyer.
I'm an
Yeah.
immigration lawyer. Our office is located across the street from City Hall, a few doors down from Ben and Jerry's on Elm Street.
Yeah.
We have a very business practice, a very busy practice.
How many of you are there? 3?
There are 3 lawyers,
3 of you?
and then a support staff.
Yeah. Okay.
We're an immigration court in Boston, 2 or 3 times a week, defending people from being deported.
An immigration court. Can you explain? It's, you know,
Well, every person who has come in,
it's in Boston. Okay.
that's right. Generally speaking, people who are being deported are entitled to a hearing.
And they have
Before
full
deport-
civil rights, do they not? Under the Constitution, or is that
not quite?
Okay.
They have quasi civil rights.
okay?
More and more, the hearings are conducted by video hookup,
Really?
which we're sad to see. But the courts are overloaded. There's something called a master calendar where you go before the judge and make your plea, and then you request bond or bail, and then the case is set down for a hearing on the merits sometime in the future. The courts are the immigration court in Boston now is so overloaded that they are setting cases down after giving bail for 2020. We had
Wow.
a case
Is this a lack
set
of
down
funding?
in March 2020 the other day.
That's
God.
incredible.
Lack
Yeah.
of funding?
Lack of funding,
Huh.
not enough judges, not enough jails, not enough prosecutors, and to some extent, it's you have to lay this at the doorstep of the Justice Department. which.
But the Justice is financed by Congress.
It's financed by Congress, but they don't negotiate plea arrangements or
Really?
compromises. So virtually every case, is held on until the last moment. It becomes very expensive, these cases, for persons trying to defend themselves. And so you have this tremendous backlog of cases in the court.
So what's happening to the undocumented immigrant who has a case in
who
2020?
gets caught in the machinery?
Yeah, what's happening to that person in the meantime?
Well, if that person gets caught, then they are brought to a federal lockup in Stratford County, outside of Dover.
Oh,
And,
Dover, okay.
which has a contract with Homeland Security that supplies maybe they have over 100 beds.
Yeah.
Is it a actual federal prison or is it a private?
It's the county jail.
Right. It's okay.
That has
It's
entered.
not an actual federal facility.
That has entered into a contract with the federal government.
Okay.
And it's the lockup for Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So they're all brought there.
Yeah.
They are vetted. We drive over to that courthouse a couple times a week and interview potential clients.
But
they stay there for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, and then they are transported to the Suffolk County Jail in Boston.
Oh, got it.
Wow.
They may stay there another week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until their hearing before the immigration court at the JFK building.
Okay.
And at that hearing, they will either get bail, typically $5,000, $10,000 bail.
Can you get a bail bond? Or
Yeah.
Is it, okay.
Yeah.
It's not cash.
Most of it is cash, though,
Okay.
because bail bondsmen.
Are they wary of?
Yeah.
Because they don't have assets.
Right.
Yeah.
And
a bail bond, 10%.
so they either
Okay.
get bail, and the case set down for 2019, 2020,
And then what?
or
I'd hate to laugh, but it's crazy. It just sounds
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
I can't believe this.
Yeah,
Can you?
that's remarkable.
or if they can't get bail, they may be held in jail for an expedited hearing for deportation,
Okay.
or they may get deported on the spot, in which case they brought back to the jail. Homeland Security arranges a plane ticket. They have their orange suit. They're in handcuffs and leg irons, and they are brought to the plane and put on the plane.
And then where are they sent? Because here's something I always wonder. So if someone is deported,
Right.
if they're sent back to Mexico or wherever they're from, what is to...
Russia.
Yeah, I mean, what's to stop them from just coming back? Are they given to the
What's
authorities?
to stop them from coming back?
Are they...
Well, presumably our crack border guards
Yes.
are alert enough to prevent them from coming back.
Because the thing is, I mean,
I
somebody
know.
could,
You could sneak across the border in Maine to go, with the drinking age.
But are they just
Those were the
dropped
old
off?
days.
Like if someone is deported to Mexico, are they just dumped off somewhere in Mexico and then that's it? Or do the Mexican
What if
authorities...
Mexico doesn't want to take them?
Yeah, that's something I've always
I
wondered
never
about.
thought about that either.
Yeah.
Do you just fly them into
Well,
Mexico?
you're raising a number of issues. First of all, there are some countries that don't want these persons back.
Yeah.
Do you ever see the movie Slapshot with that Canadian guy, the enforcer? The Canada won't take him back, and the U.S. doesn't want him.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. But in order to send them back, they have to have a passport to get into their home country.
Okay.
Right? And if they don't have a passport, sometimes the home country will say, we're not issuing a passport.
Because who are you, right?
Well, they don't
want them.
they don't want the person back.
Some
Yeah.
people get their passports seized.
When I was U.S. ambassador in
Belize.
Belize, the United States was arresting a lot of gang members, particularly in California, Los Angeles,
Yeah.
for example. And they would go through the process, and then ultimately law enforcement would put them on the plane, and they would just show up in Belize. And the government constantly complained that if you're sending back these criminals, please let us know in advance.
Right.
Because chances are they are going to commit crimes in their home country.
Or they might already be wanted by the authorities, in theory, right? They may already have. They may have
theory.
in some instances, may have already
Sure.
committed crimes there. And
Sure.
Yeah.
So we were not good at coordinating the deportation with the country to which we were sending them back to.
right. Yeah, because that's something I've always wondered about.
In New Hampshire, what do you see mostly? What do you deal with mostly? Like what we're talking about now, illegal immigrants? Are you dealing with bringing families together, or are you helping tech workers come to New Hampshire?
All of that.
Okay.
Is that the H-1B visas, the tech workers?
The H-1B
Okay.
visas
Which
are
are-
the tech workers, of which there is a ceiling of 50,000
Which
each
surprised
year.
me.
Yeah.
So
Used to be 100.
used to be 120,000.
Oh, it's been lowered. Okay.
And you can the window opens for the application for H-1B visas on April 1st until they receive the 50,000, which in the last 5 years has occurred within 7 days. In fact, last year 180,000 were applied for the H-1B visas, only 50,000 of which were granted, so immigration conducted a lottery.
What's the fee?
And
The fee for an HB1 visa?
well, when you consider the attorney fees, which are
Right.
a couple of thousand, and then the filing fee, the adjustment of status fee, which incidentally is $1,070, the fraud fee, which could be $1,500, a training fee. This is to train immigration workers, U.S. immigration workers, to be able to process the visas. That's $700.
Wow.
$700.
Huh.
And you add all these things together, and an employer is paying probably $5,000-$6,000 for one of these visas.
And it's a lottery, so you
And
not
then
guaranteed.
because
Wow,
you
yeah.
have 180,000 applications for 50,000 positions, you conduct a lottery, and 2 to 3 to 1, you could lose the lottery, and you've spent all that money and gotten no return on
So
it.
that's discouraging. Any business person who does a cost-benefit
Is
analysis.
that rational?
Yeah.
Is that rational?
Well, but that's why we need immigration reform,
Yeah.
and people need to write to Senator Ayotte and Senator Shaheen and Frank
was-
Ginta and Annie McLean Custer and tell them to promote immigration reform.
Yeah.
Now, there was an immigration reform when I was in the military station in Europe in the 80s. When I came back to California, there'd been I was required, like, in California, they wanted to see my passport and this and that. There was a what was the act? There was an immigration reform act. It was around 86.
That's right.
But what was it called? Simpson of Wyoming. I can't remember who else. Was
Simpson and a congressman from New Jersey, Magzolia, or something
Okay.
like that.
But that was an attempt to rationalize immigration. How come it didn't work? Because I remember.
Well, at that time, they were trying to figure out what to do with the undocumented living in the country.
Right, which in
And
California was a.
And
issue.
there were about 3 million at that time. And so there was a bargain struck to increase law enforcement and to normalize the status of
An
undocumented. And it was.
Would you call that an amnesty?
It was an amnesty bill, and it was signed by
half the
Reagan.
citizenship- Right.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan. Yeah. Patriot
and-
saint of modern
Right,
conservatism.
Yes.
and for a while the immigration system was fixed, but there hasn't been any real serious reform since those days.
What is the path to citizenship?
The path to
Everybody talks
citizenship.
about?
Yeah.
Seems rational. What I
Well,
get
if you're an
about
undocumented
Right.
person living in the United States, there is no path. So
Really?
you can wait till something freezes over, and
Yes, I've met
and-
people in California. Their parents been in the country for 30 years, paying taxes, everything.
that's
afraid
right.
of being.
and
Bombed
those
out.
persons will not become legal
So if you're already here illegally, there is no incentive whatsoever to attempt to.
unless
You got a good lawyer.
unless you unless you came into the country legally and overstayed.
Overstayed. Okay.
Oh, that's
and
my
if
friend
you
that I
marry,
yeah.
if you
She
marry
came
an
at 12.
American citizen, you can become legal.
Okay.
There is a path to legalization.
Okay.
But you have to do it in their country. 'Cause
No.
I had a friend
You
who got
can-
married here, but she didn't do the paperwork right, and boy, that was an expensive
Oh, really?
nightmare.
Yes.
Yeah, because she was from one of the. Well, she was from Russia, and she she didn't want to go back to Mother Russia at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Right.
But outside of that, there's no incentive if you're already here to
Well, what
into
Obama
the-
tried to do.
This was
and
Obama, the Obama administration.
What the Obama administration tried to do in recent times was to allow young people who were brought to the United States at a very young age
Right.
by parents who were undocumented to gain a status that allowed them to remain in the United States
Without fear of deportation.
without
and-
fear of deportation.
Was
And
it-
it's
was
called
this the Dream
deferred action for child arrival. It's
the-
called
this is
DACA.
Okay.
Something called DACA.
And
That's separate from the Dream Act, right?
No, that is the
That's
that
the
It is.
Dream
It
Act.
is
well,
the same
that
thing?
is a version of the Dream Act, except it wasn't an act; it was a regulation.
Okay.
So it wasn't passed by Congress, and it
Right.
can be repealed by a new president.
Right.
Okay.
Many people don't realize the law is passed, and you got to put the regulations in too.
Yeah.
Or else we have
And-
equal pay for women after.
And so from
60
that,
years.
2 years later, the Obama administration said, "Well, we have we've created a temporary fix for young people. Now let's see if we can create a temporary fix for the parents of American citizens of children."
So a person that
So
came
that-
here illegally and had their child here, which
That's
under
right.
and under the 14th Amendment, you're born here,
Right.
you are a U.S. citizen.
That's
Yeah.
right. And so they said, well, we're going to create a series of priorities. We are going to make that person who is the parent of an American citizen a low priority. And we are going to make a high priority people who are recent arrivals in the United States, recently came
Oh.
over undocumented. They
Like
should go back.
The Costa Ricans, is that who that they've been rounding up and deporting recently? The families.
Why would anybody want
Well,
to skip from Costa
no.
Rica?
Not Costa
All my
Rica,
friends were going down to
no.
live there.
I forget. There's a specific
But
place.
no, this has nothing to do with the surge on the border for the children.
Oh, the children. right.
But these are people who came to the United States within the past 2 or 3 or even 5 years.
Yeah.
They would be a high priority to be deported. Also,
to be
persons
deported. Okay.
to be deported. Also, persons with criminal records, serious criminal
course.
records, they would be a high priority.
Felonies.
And then persons who were single and not particularly integrated into society, they would be another priority
Might
that
deport
you
me.
would
Yeah.
you would be deported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's a
that
strange-
but that we were going to
Yeah.
consider
Right.
very low on the scale of deportation parents of American citizens. So
Because
Right.
they to deport them, the children.
well, you're
would
breaking
be-
up
right.
families.
You're breaking
and,
up
we
Is that
have
a
this thing
priority?
about family
families and American immigration law.
values.
families.
But what happened was that the Republican leadership in Congress and in the state of Texas went to federal court in Texas to enjoin the implementation of this regulation.
And is that a conservative circuit? I
And-
can't remember which one that
Yes.
is. Yeah.
And so
You have the 12
an injunction was entered, and so the rationale for the Obama regulation was to
They got to stay preventing the regulations.
was to ration resources as to who you deport first.
Right.
Now, without the rationing, you're deporting parents
Right, whoever you can
of American citizens
Right.
over using
Yeah.
those resources to go after maybe the more difficult cases of criminals and people
Oh,
with
that
criminal
makes
records.
that makes perfect sense to me. Only because they're easy. It's easy to. I'll tell you a thing. We had a whistleblower case. It was the National Whistleblower Center. The guy blew the whistle on. Rather than putting the air marshals on the flight between Los Angeles and Boston, they're putting them all on trunk flights of just like an hour and a half, 2 hours. So you'd have a lot more. Oh, you'd hit your target, but
okay.
it wasn't helping anything. Boy, they nailed him, but he got a good lawyer. But see, the rationality, what they're doing is, well, we're pinching all these people. We're enforcing the law.
Well, you
but it's
increase
not,
your statistics.
Right.
Right.
But it's not
But
effective at all.
You're not
Yeah.
really getting at the problem
Right, yeah.
of
You've been in
creating
the Army.
Yeah. You're just
a more
pat.
secure society.
Yeah. You're just padding
I've
your
been in
numbers.
Washington.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's the logic. It's the bureaucratic logic.
That's how you get promoted. You pad your numbers. You show
Oh,
you look like you're doing something.
Right.
Yeah.
But at first, it doesn't seem rational. It's not rational from a moral or
So
societal
now this
point of view.
case is before the
Yeah.
United States Supreme Court. A decision is expected in June as to whether or not the regulation was implemented lawfully.
Constitution.
And so
Have they already voted?
We've got a court that
8.
that with 8 members on, and so we will see what happens
Yeah.
in June.
Yeah. Let me ask you this: How do you define amnesty? Because one of the things that drives me nuts is, and I mentioned it on your show, John, how the
Right.
Republicans have boxed themselves in, where if you if you're a Republican, if you suggest any kind of immigration reform, you're automatically accused of being for amnesty, which has become a dirty word. But I argue that they've really kind of twisted, for political purposes, obviously, what amnesty actually means. Now, I think we all agree, right? What Reagan did was an amnesty, but giving people a path to some sort of legal status, not even necessarily citizenship. That's not amnesty, is it?
Well, amnesty, by definition, is a form of forgiveness. So if you have created an infraction, or you've come here without the proper documentation, amnesty is a forgiveness of that act, and then would put you on a path to either legalization or a path to citizenship.
But people that clearly are in that would deserve it, like these people that have been in the United States so long, paid their taxes, worked, been good citizens, had children here, are part of their
Paid a
communities.
penalty, that's
and,
right.
And you actually, like in California and even Texas, you meet those people. They are parents of good friends. So when you're talking about amnesty or forgiveness, it's not like they've committed, in my mind, a crime.
Well, it's not
a
even. It's technically not a crime, right? To come here illegally, isn't it a misdemeanor?
Well,
And
it is
I mean, a crime
no.
is typically a felony,
crime.
right? Or
No.
No,
It's
there's all
neither.
sorts of
it's neither.
No, it's a civil infraction.
plenty of people overstay.
Interesting. Okay.
It's not a crime. It's not a misdemeanor. It's not a felony. It is not part of the criminal law.
Interesting. Okay, because that's the other thing too. The Republicans say, well, they've committed a crime, or there was a. I don't know if you know Jay Severin. He was a political talk show host, conservative guy from Boston. Who I don't know if he's even still on the air, but he used to call them. I'm sure he thought this was very clever. He would call them crim-aliens, criminal aliens, which I just thought
But
was
they're not.
offensive. But they're not.
I've met people.
So it's not even a misdemeanor to cross the border illegally, is what you're saying.
Right.
Interesting. Okay. Very good to know. Okay.
A lot of people have a visa. I know.
Yeah.
being a Sovietologist, you'd have people, actually meet people, and they'd come to. I tell you, when you sponsored them, and suddenly they said, "I'm not going back to Armenia."
Yeah.
Whatever.
You know,
But
yeah.
it works out.
Yeah.
It's interesting also to see how our
people I knew it
our
worked out for,
application for visas has changed over the years. When a person applies for a visa, you used to be able to do it on paper, particularly from many of our friendly countries. You didn't even have to have a personal interview. Now every visa application has to have a personal interview. These interviews, however,
You mean in an embassy? You'd have
at
to
an
go in?
embassy. So,
Wow.
but these interviews occur over 3 minutes.
That's it.
That's it for the interviews. The common wisdom is that the consular officer deciding the visa decides within the first 90 seconds as to whether or not you're going to get the visa, simply by asking a few questions and observing body language.
Doesn't sound much different than crossing the border and dealing with the border guard.
The applicant sits at a bulletproof
Actually, you're trained to
2
read
inch
body language.
2-inch thick window. The applicant is not allowed to, in most cases, display any paper or documentation. No documentation is requested. Everything is electronic now.
Okay.
Right.
But a lot of these documents are not even submitted electronically. So,
Really?
But I just know from the intelligence, you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
trained.
the whole
Yeah.
concept of a person's life being decided within 90 seconds is a rather novel and new experience
Yeah.
for people seeking to come to the United States, and it's not a particularly pleasant experience to endure one of these interviews.
Ambassador George, I'll tell you what it's like coming into Heathrow, England, in '82 with an English name and an Irish face, and having that guy look at you because the IRA's have been pretty active, and you're coming from Boston.
Yeah.
I've been looked at like, England. Look at that, look at that face.
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, but when you talk about intelligence, certain you're taught how to read and stuff.
Sure,
But it's
sure.
almost like we're going to like a hybrid of 1984 and Brave New World or something, because these are just people that want to come to the United States. Because the people I
Right.
tell you that don't read, they were people like counter intel and stuff.
Yeah.
But 90 seconds, is that fair?
Well, and the other thing is that there's no appeal from a
No
denial.
appeal.
Oh, really?
No
Okay.
appeal.
So if you're told no, that's it
So,
forever?
so there's the concept of what's called consular infallibility. So,
Wow.
Where you would
well,
tell-
I'm able to
No appeal.
in cases like that. There's no formal appeal, but in cases like that, I'm able to
As an
call-
ambassador, you are.
call the consul general at that embassy and have a conversation and have another consular officer take a second look.
Almost like a back channel appeal.
at the application, but there is
Yeah.
no formal appeal.
Wow.
For those kinds of decisions.
Because they have no rights?
They
they're
have,
not
because they have no
citizens?
rights.
Right.
There's no right of a person to come to the United States.
Do we know any
Never
numbers
really thought of that.
as far as how many people are turned down, or
The
what
state-
the
Right.
percentages?
This-
Russia,
state-
it's so hard
Really?
to even get your relatives. It's like going through, because, being in that mission, we met all the people
Yeah.
from the former Soviet Union. Oh, man, to thread the needle is really difficult, even for close relatives.
Really?
Because you're considered they're going to come here and just get lost.
Yeah.
And to be frank, I know a couple people that did that. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
why would you want to go back to
Right, right.
some of these countries? But
Are a lot of people turned down?
I don't really.
A lot of people are turned down. Some in certain countries more than others.
Yeah.
There's a concept called 214B, where it's a regulation that that presumes that every person applying for a visa to come to the United States seeks to remain in the United States as an immigrant.
Right.
So the burden of a person seeking a visa is to demonstrate the negative. No, I do not wish to stay in the United States. And how do you do this? The person has to show that they are integrated into their home community, that they have many relatives and family members that are leaving behind, that they may own a house, they have a bank account, they own a car. They're
going to school.
They're going to school. They're employed.
Right.
They have a steady income. They're stable. They belong to organizations. Some people can demonstrate these things, and some people cannot.
Okay. All right.
So it's the 214B concept.
This country really is, France or Germany or Britain. When you're coming like former Soviet, even Russia. This is like it was to our great-great-grandparents.
Well, we have 36 countries. Citizens from 36 countries can come to the United States without a visa. You can show up.
It would be like France,
and
EU,
yes, and get a visa at the border. And likewise, the courtesy is reciprocal.
Okay.
Right, I can go to the UK.
So I'm going to the UK in a few weeks, and I don't need to get a visa,
Right,
thank
they
goodness.
stamp, and that's the...
Although, under this new procedure called ESTA, you have to fill out a questionnaire online to show where you're going, what you're doing, and give your birth and your passport number, so that before you get on the plane, they will have already run you through a database.
Okay.
Cameron in the UK has a labyrinth of new fees.
Really?
But that's for Americans that are like, my brother lives in England, and Tom Massingale's.
Well, in most cases, those fees are reciprocal. It's because the United States is constantly raising our fees for people wanting to come here. So other countries are therefore matching the fees that the United States is charging.
Yeah.
And so the United States is probably the most expensive country to visit and to immigrate to.
Okay.
So if a person wants to get just simply a visitor visa to come here for a week, go to Disneyland or something like that, you're talking about a fee of $260.
Yeah.
And so if you're a family of 3 or 4 people wanting to go to Disneyland, you're looking
expensive.
You're looking at fees of maybe $1,000.
Disneyland is expensive enough on its own.
My brother was career military, basically a career military. I think everything's going to take care of.
Right.
So his visa expired while he was in the United States. It's like, oh my God, look at the what he had to do to get back.
Yeah.
He was here 4 months. We got a lot of work on him because he's very handy. But you got to go. Honestly, it does depend on a lawyer.
Yeah.
A good lawyer can mean deportation or family getting together.
Yeah.
What happens to somebody who overstays their visa and gets caught? Do they just get, are they facing any kind of criminal penalties, or are they just deported?
They're not facing a criminal penalty, but they can be arrested, and many are. They can be put in jail over in Dover.
Yeah.
And then down to the Suffolk jail, and then deported.
Yeah.
If they've been in the United States, overstayed more than 6 months, there is a 3-year penalty.
No kidding.
Wow.
You have to go and you can't come back.
You can't come back for 3 years.
Yeah.
If you've overstayed 12 months, then there is a 10-year penalty.
Wow.
Is that recent?
No.
Jeez.
So there's a 10-year penalty. I think that was implemented under the Clinton administration, if I'm not mistaken. But here's the thing about these penalties.
No wonder why my friends don't want to call in.
Well,
Yeah.
Because I'm just going to say, from the
it's
former
a
Soviet Union,
it's a very severe penalty.
Yeah.
So if we see this from time to time, a person who has been in the United States undocumented or overstayed for a long period of time, more than a year, their parent will die, and so they'll leave the country to go to the funeral, and then try to get back in.
Ugh.
And they can't get back in, even if they have
Wow.
an
Oh, yeah.
American wife or an American
Oh.
children, and they have a job and they're stable. And if they've been in the United States for 10 or 20 years, they can't get back in for 10
UK
years.
similar too.
No
You-
kidding.
Well, 10
We've-
years. Oh,
We've been
geez.
fairly successful in applying for waivers for people in those positions,
Yeah.
but it's expensive, and a waiver application could take the good part of a year. So
Wow.
the whole idea of these penalties was to create an incentive for people to not overstay. But in fact, the penalties are so harsh that it becomes an incentive for them not to leave.
Exactly. That's what
Right.
happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're not going to go
That's what happens.
back to Mexico or back to France to attend a funeral. You're not going to go back because things are better over there, and that you may just want to come back as a visitor. No, you're going to stay here because you know if you leave, you can't come back.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
so you've got a reverse incentive,
Yeah.
which is regrettable.
Yeah.
Ambassador George, we live in a different world than I'm talking about. You know, when I go to England in 1982, it just seems with the travel and everything. When I was in Europe, people traveled by trains and and I would fly into England and everything. But it just seems with all sorts of countries now, you can just get to the United States on an airplane just like that, and the amount of people in travel. And what I'm trying to say is the interconnectedness
Yeah.
of the world
Globalization.
just keeps increasing.
Yeah.
You know, people. It's not like it
is
used.
very
they-
interconnected.
remember
But
the
I'll tell
jets?
you-
You had the jet set, but people that aren't so well up can come here and all
Sure,
that.
yeah.
So has it kept up?
I'll
with the
tell
very
you
fact?
one
Yeah.
disconnect, though.
Okay.
I recently applied for something called Global Entry to become
Heard about this.
to become a trusted traveler.
So you don't have to stand in line at the airport, right?
I don't have to stand in line at the airport when I come into the United States from a foreign country. I can simply show my card, or they have my fingerprints.
Yeah.
I put the fingerprint on the screen, and I can go right through the border, the entry process, and there I am in the United States, and I can catch my connecting flight.
Yeah.
I tried to use my global entry card to board a U.S. domestic flight.
Couldn't do it?
They said, I'm sorry, we don't recognize that ID. I said, this is to TSA. And he says, and besides, you're in the wrong line. You're in the pre-check line. You should be in the other general line. The pre-check, there's a little check mark on your boarding pass
Right.
Yeah.
that allows you to get into a fast lane to
For some reason, I got
at-
that when I went to California.
at
Yeah.
at the Manchester airport.
Yeah.
So they say, sorry, you don't have pre-checked, and you're in the wrong line. And I say, here's my global entry. I'm a trusted traveler. And they say, sorry, we don't recognize that card. I said, but this card was issued by Department of Homeland Security.
and you
And
are
they-
part of it.
And
Homeland
you're part of
Yeah.
Homeland Security. He says, yes, but that's a card that is used by Customs and Border Protection. We're TSA. We don't recognize Customs and Border Protection in the Homeland Security Agency. So I'm thinking, okay, I can enter the United States using this card, but I can't get on a domestic flight to go from Boston or Manchester to Chicago using the card. I mean, there's something wrong with that picture.
You were just taking global too literally.
Well,
Global with domestic exceptions, I guess. I don't know. No, that is strange. That is strange. Not surprising though in some ways because that's just
and TSA is proud of it.
I bet they are.
You know, they're enforcing the law.
They're doing a great job.
They're doing a great job of. Aren't going to be any trusted travelers going through their line.
That's right.
Hey, those folks had a heck of a time keeping their union. You know?
Well, we got to begin to wrap up. But Ambassador George Bruno, thank you so much for sticking around today, and we appreciate it. And of course, John, thank you so much, and thank you for having me on Ward 13. Okay. I appreciate that as always. And if you're watching this live and didn't get to see the whole thing, of course, we'll have this up on YouTube as well as Ward 13 with John Hopwood. So you can look for that on the IPM Nation channel on YouTube. And of course, if you're watching live on Wednesday, I'll be back at 6 p.m. with the Honorable Gary S. Hopper. And gentlemen, thank you again. Thank you all for watching. And we'll talk at you again a little bit later. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.